Hey now everybody! Ever since I started this feature, one thing that has been a mild frustration from the start is the fact that people keep asking about things that aren't really urban legends, but just false codes or rumors. I also get a lot of haunted cart nonsense requested, but really, I covered that already in the Tails doll episode. Just replace Tails doll with whatever it is. Same exact thing. But anyway, I figured it would be beneficial to do an episode looking at some of the more prevalent fake codes, hoaxes, and rumors that have gone around. Just try to understand one thing. If I didn't cover the exact fake code that you're thinking of, just pretend I did, because it's honestly not all that interesting to talk about them. I want to keep this series about urban legends, not debunking every rumor that comes along. So I'll be covering a sampling of popular fake codes and hoaxes and whatnot. Let's start with one of the oldest ones. This one has to do with Duck Hunt. Chances are, if you own an NES, you own Duck Hunt, as most models of the system came with the game, along with Super Mario Bros. On one cart. And it was one of the few games to support the Nintendo Zapper that was halfway decent. One interesting thing about Duck Hunt is that it never got any kind of sequel or remake or anything, the closest thing being one of the mini-games in Wii Play. Anyway, if you're like me and you had this game as a kid, you know the biggest irritant in the game is that dog. The hunter's trusty dog appears at the start of every level and jumps into the bushes to scare ducks into the air, which you then shoot. Every time you shoot a duck, the dog pops up holding it. Every time you miss and a duck gets away, the dog pops up and laughs at you. That laugh has haunted many a gamer, and of course the question a lot of people have is, why can't you shoot the damn dog? Well, to me that seems pretty cruel, but then again, that dog is an asshole. Why does he have to laugh at you? Then again, the hunter is a maniac. How many damn ducks does he need? Well, we know you can't shoot the dog, or more accurately, shooting the dog has no effect. He's for all intents and purposes invincible. That hasn't stopped people from creating flash animations in games where gamers could vent their frustrations on the pooch by blowing him away. Thing is, you probably heard that there is a way to shoot the dog, and many people claim to have seen this. Well, my answer to you is it can't happen in the NES version, no matter what you can do. Using codes or game genies will have no effect, as although they can enhance gameplay, they can't access things that aren't on the game's ROM. The dog shooting rumor actually comes from the arcade version of the game, where if you shoot the dog, he would say, "Ouch, shoot the ducks, not me." So you could technically shoot him in the arcade version, but it wouldn't kill him or anything. And keep in mind not to confuse the arcade version with the Play Choice 10 version, which is basically the NES game converted to a coin-operated machine. The actual arcade Duck Hunt is called Versus Duck Hunt. Next up, let's talk about Final Fantasy VII. For a lot of my younger viewers, this may have been your first RPG or even your first game. The big rumor here is that you could somehow revive Aerith, the mage who famously is killed in the game by the game's villain Sephiroth on the first disc of the game. The thing is, Aerith's death is plot-driven, and there's nothing on the game disc that would suggest that there's a way to revive her, despite what you've heard. This one isn't based in any sort of fact or reality, but just really wishful thinking. For the people who became attached to the character and they were unhappy when she died, they just really wanted a way to bring her back and wanted to believe that there was a way. Personally, I've always felt that killing off characters in a Final Fantasy game seems like a weird idea. I mean, why couldn't they just use a Phoenix down? I guess characters in RPGs only die if it's plot-driven, or if you're playing Fire Emblem. Aerith would go on to appear in other games and media, such as the Kingdom Hearts games and Final Fantasy Advent Children, but as far as Final Fantasy VII is concerned, she's gone for good. Next, let's talk about Zelda, Ocarina of Time to be exact. When this game was first around, there was also around the time that I was first online, and there were a lot of ridiculous rumors, hoaxes, and fake codes for the game, but the biggest bit of misinformation had to deal with the race against the Postman. No matter how hard gamers tried, he would always beat them by a small margin, which would just get them to try again and again. No one has ever beaten him, despite what they say, and I've seen all sorts of elaborate and ridiculous codes posted all over the internet, some of which involve specific routes to take during the race, or fictional items that you'd need, or power-ups that aren't in the game. Another rumor is that you could somehow play as Sheik. One elaborate code that I've seen to play as Sheik involved running all over the place doing things in a specific sequence, but the dead giveaway was that it was fake, was that it asked you to get a bottle full of lava, something that the game doesn't allow. Well, there's nothing in the game's ROM that would suggest Sheik is a playable character, so that one's right out the window. Plus, it would break the plot of the game significantly. As for the postman, you'd have to think there has to be some way to win the race. After all, why would Nintendo put a challenge in the game that's impossible? The answer is because they can. The game's script runs so that he will always beat you no matter what. Even if you used a Game Shark or other device to increase Link's movement speed, you'd still lose the race, because there's no code or dialogue in the game reflected to relate to a victory. So even though you got to the goal first, the game would act like you lost. So why torture gamers? They thought it was funny. While I'm on the subject of Ocarina of Time, one rumor that persists to this date is the Triforce. Early screenshots of the game showed Link holding up the Triforce, which made people think that there was a way to obtain the relic. This wasn't helped by Nintendo, who posted fake codes themselves, complete with doctored screenshots, as an April Fool's joke, claiming that obtaining the Triforce would have numerous effects on the game, such as allowing Link to win that impossible race and unfreezing Zora's domain in the adult time. Well, the Triforce isn't in the game in that sense. Anybody who's played through the game and is familiar with the plot knows that Link already has a part of the Triforce of Courage, and that it resides on his hand. When Ganondorf obtained the Triforce, he only obtained a third that is the most important to him, the Triforce of Power. And the other two pieces went to people worthy, Link for courage and Zelda for wisdom. Being able to obtain the Triforce during the game wouldn't make much sense plot-wise. The fact is, those early screenshots are just that, screenshots from early versions of the game that had elements that were later taken out. But there are some people who claim that the Triforce still is in the game somewhere. One example of this was told to me years ago by a person in a chat room. He claimed that the Triforce was located in a treasure chest in the Temple of Time. According to him, in an early version of the game, there was a room in the Temple of Time containing the Triforce, and when it was decided that it would be cut out, instead of removing the room, chest, and Triforce, they simply cut off access to it by removing the door that leads to it. He claims that you could hack the game's ROM with some programming knowledge and add a door, which would allow Link to enter the room and obtain the Triforce, which would promptly crash the game, as it tried to access dialogue that was no longer in the game. Well, I don't know whether to believe this story or not. For one, it sounds believable, as oftentimes game developers will take shortcuts when removing content. I already talked about this when I talked about Hot Coffee, the sex minigame in Grand Theft Auto Vice City, which was removed by simply removing access to it and restored by modders. That part is believable, but I wonder, why would they remove the dialogue and not the actual room? If there was no way to bring up the dialogue, was it really worth the effort to remove it? It can't have taken up more space than the room itself in the game's ROM. Then again, maybe it was just easier to remove, or maybe it just got moved. None of this has been confirmed or debunked, but whether or not it's true, it's not something that can be accessed during normal gameplay. Another big code has to do with Super Mario 64. Is Luigi in the game? No, he's not in the game. Nor is he even mentioned. But people have wondered about it for a long time, and there's been loads of hoaxes. I'll tell you guys a story. When I was in high school, a friend of mine tried to pull this nonsense on me by telling me that you could unlock Luigi by fighting Bowser and getting 1,000 coins during the battle, which would involve playing for a very long time, avoiding Bowser's attacks, and grabbing the 2 or 3 coins that would occasionally appear. He swore up and down that this is true, and I actually tried it, if only to prove him wrong. Of course, it's not only untrue, but the game does not allow Mario to hold more than 999 coins. So, all you'll do is waste a few hours. I, to this day, do not understand the point of telling someone something like this. Did he just want me to waste my time for a few hours? I don't know exactly what he got out of that, especially even after I confronted him. He still stuck by his story that it was true. You'd think that he'd be like, haha, gotcha. Well, some people are just delusional, I guess. It's actually a shame that Luigi isn't even mentioned in the game, but I guess considering the game itself, there's no reason for him to be playable. Though I wish he could have at least had a cameo like Yoshi did. In the Nintendo DS version, you can play as Luigi, so take solace in that. But all the screenshots that you've seen prior of the Nintendo 64 version featuring Luigi are simply just doctored. Oh man, here's a stupid one. Tomb Raider. Yeah, you know where I'm going with this, right? This is just sad. I personally don't like Tomb Raider very much. The gameplay is okay in the first few, but for the most part, I don't see the appeal. Of course, there's the obvious appeal for people to play as a chick with big hooters and short shorts, but really, look at Laura in the first Tomb Raider. Is this attractive? Does this turn you on? I hope not. It doesn't resemble anything like a woman. The PlayStation was a great system, but it wasn't known for realistic graphics, especially that it existed during the awkward transition from 2D to 3D graphics. So really, the whole nude code thing just perturbs me. Why in the hell would you even want to see it? I guess it could be kind of funny, but are you going to be seriously turned on by a bunch of blocky polygon titties? Well, this one does have some basis in fact, sadly, as there is a fan-made mod for the PC version of the game called Nude Raider. It takes off Laura's clothes. But as for the PlayStation version, if you want to see her naked, just go on the internet and do a Google image search, because it ain't happening. And while you're at it, call up your mom and apologize to her for turning out the way you did. Okay, one last one, and then I'm calling it quits. This one has to do with Mortal Kombat, specifically the Super NES version. As we know, the early 16-bit era was the era of Nintendo's strict censorship policies, which did not allow blood in games. It's kind of weird because I can think of plenty of NES games that have some blood, but I guess graphics just got better and allowed for more realistic violence, so Nintendo, or at least their American branch, became more concerned. Still, it led to some pretty silly things, like the censorship in Super Castlevania 4. The red blood-like liquid in one of the stages was changed to green, and a tiny bit of blood was removed from the title screen. Okay, but why did they cover up the nude statues in the background? I mean, I could sort of understand it, but the Medusa boss is still running around with her tits out. It was a weird time, my friends. A weird time. Anyway, Mortal Kombat was a huge part of the Genesis gaining a foothold against the technically superior Super NES. Nintendo had a more powerful machine and a built-in consumer base. Sega's only real advantage was that they put out a 16-bit console first. Although the Super NES won this war in the end, the Genesis was very rarely far behind, and at times they would even be ahead of the Super NES. Mortal Kombat went a long way towards that by heavily censoring itself on the Super NES, removing all blood and replacing it with gray sweat, and then dialing down the fatalities by quite a lot, calling them finishing bonuses. People preferred the Genesis version, which, while it didn't live up to the Super NES's standards of graphics and audio, was a more arcade-like experience. One thing that always annoyed me to no end about this is, who really gives a shit if the characters bleed or not? It doesn't affect gameplay. What's funny is, gameplay-wise, the Genesis version is still better, but no one ever seems to mention that. All they ever go on and on about is the shit that doesn't matter. Anyway, another thing that people forget is that the Genesis version is just as censored, if not more so, and that you had to unlock the blood and fatalities by putting in a code. It's a code that almost everybody knows, ABACABB, or Abacab. This in itself is an interesting bit of trivia, as Abacab was an album by the band Genesis. Cute, huh? So there's a code in the Genesis version. Is there one in the Super NES version? Nope. Despite what you've heard, there is no built-in code that allows for blood or violent fatalities in the Super NES version of Mortal Kombat. You could use a game-modifying device, such as a Game Genie, to change the color palette, altering the sprays of gray sweat to be red and resemble blood. But this will not include blood dripping onto the ground like in the arcade and Genesis versions, and it will not change the fatalities. One last thing to mention, though, is that it's probably a good thing that they censored it, as Nintendo losing quite a lot of sales to Sega because of this made them realize the error of their ways, and subsequent games in the series and others would remain uncensored, leading to the creation of the ESRB rating system. Well, that's going to be it. These are just some examples of rumors, fake codes, and hoaxes. Some of them have a basis in fact, and some of them are just nonsense wish fulfillment, but they're all false. Hopefully this will stem the tide of requests for stuff like this, as I prefer to work on things that actually qualify as urban legends. And next week, I got a doozy for you. We'll examine whether or not someone could use a PlayStation 2 to launch missiles.